We will not get to the resurrection of Lazarus this morning, but we want to set the scene because of some of the things said and done by Jesus, teaching moments to his disciples. In 1993, a movie entitled Shadowlands told the story of C.S. Lewis and Joy Gresham. At the beginning of the film, Lewis was lecturing on the subject of pain, and the room was full, Oxford University. And he told them pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. We are like blocks of stone out of which the sculptor carves the forms of men. The blows of his chisel, which hurt us so much, also make us perfect. The movie portrayed his meeting an American, her name was Joy Gresham, and they fell in love. Lewis was a confirmed bachelor. He fought falling in love. He fought marrying anyone, much less Joy Gresham, but they came to fall in love and they were married. And one day as they were sitting together, she shouted to him, "I have only now just seen it, how you have arranged a life for yourself where no one can touch you. Everyone that's close to you is either younger than you or weaker than you or under your control." She was trying to loosen him up for friendship, at least. And slowly they became husband and wife, and they had 4 wonderful years together. But she came to realize that she had cancer, and it was terminal. And they had trouble talking about it. And this next quotation is why I began this important chapter with this illustration. In a steady voice, she said, "Let me just say it before this rain stopped and we go back, that I am going to die, and I want you to be with me then too. The only way I can do that is if I'm able to talk to you now. I think it can be better than just managing. What I'm trying to say is the pain then is part of the happiness now. That's the deal." John chapter 11 teaches us to deal with the pain of death. And in a very vivid sense, next Sunday, we will see what death did to Christ in this circumstance. But it's something that Jesus needed to talk about with his disciples. And then he was able to talk about it with Mary and Martha and bring about one of the last great miracles. It's the conquering of the last enemy, death. Now, he had already raised the widow's son, and he had already raised another man who had come, and he declared at a distance to be healed, and he was. But the bottom line is there are times when this parable proved to be this lesson proved to be the crescendo of the opposition that the religious leaders had to Christ, and his once for all revealing to the world who he was. John chapter 11, a man named Lazarus was sick, and he was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. If you've ever read the writings of Frank Viola, I suggest it. He's written a marvelous book entitled Jesus. But Frank Viola also wrote a book about the city of Bethany. And from what he gathered from the Gospels, he assumed that it was one of Jesus' favorite cities. It wasn't that far away from Jerusalem. And Mary and Martha, who are introduced here for the first time in John's Gospel, lived there with a brother named Lazarus. It seemed that he would be able to, at a short distance, be able to go and relax and get away from his enemies and get away from the crisis that were in his world. And John has just led us through a great period of confrontation that would come to a conclusion only upon the death of Christ himself. So John is introducing Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and he tells us this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. Now that event will be part of our study from the next chapter in 2 weeks. But John tells us here, as he's introducing them, who she was and what she would do later. And so the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." We note that she did not ask for anything. We do come to believe from later statements that we'll see next week that she did expect something. Both of them did. But she knew that just letting Jesus know that he lay sick would put them in a position to receive something from him. The reality is it was the proper response, and we can understand that he would respond as he did, except he didn't. We'll see that in a minute. Let me make another point. C.F. Andrews tells a story of 2 friends in World War I. One of them was wounded and had been left lying on the ground, probably would soon pass. But the other, a best friend, crawled out with great trouble and danger and great physical exertion, crawled out to crawl up alongside his friend. And his friend looked up and said simply to him, "I knew you would come." And there are times in our life when things happen that we let people know that something's happening in our life. And we too just know that they will do something. If they're able to come, we just know they'll be able to do something, perhaps even come to be of help. There are times in life when people call out to us, and sometimes we're not able to respond as we would like to. Other states, sometimes other countries. And we know the best thing we can do, and we know that they know that we will immediately begin praying for their circumstance. The best thing we can do is to offer prayer for those in need, and if we're able to, we should try to go. And there are some in our life that would expect that to take place. And that's what Mary and Martha would have hoped for here. When he heard, verse 4, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed there for 2 more days. We know in other times, and we saw it last week, Jesus said to his disciples, this man born blind did not become blind because sin from either himself or his parents. And we talked about that. And you were very kind with your remarks as we dealt with an issue around that. But he said this occurred so that God's glory could be shown. And in the story of the blind man, the point seemed appropriate to say that the response that he gives to this circumstance and the response that we give to difficult circumstances in our life are used by God to bring glory. How we adjust, how we act according to crisis matters. People are watching. And it brings glory to God if the response is similar to what we would want. Here he adds one other thing. Here he says that it is for God's glory that this is taking place, and it is for God's Son, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. And what Jesus is telling us is let's just wait and let the story live itself out. Let it play out. Let's see what happens. Let's see how God is glorified. Let's see how Christ himself is lifted up. Let's see what this circumstance used by God through Christ brings about in his life. Now, I'll give you a hint on the negative side. When Jesus later went into the city on those last hours of his life, they lined the streets and they sang praises about him. But we were told that the crowds were very large because some of them wanted to see Lazarus, who had been raised from the dead. And we know later that the Jewish leaders are going to make the statement that we want to kill him, but also to kill Lazarus. And it's amazing to think that they didn't realize that you're going to kill someone who won't stay dead in both Christ and Lazarus. But God would be glorified, and God's Son would be glorified in this. And then, as a matter of record, Jesus stayed in Bethany for 2 days. We'll find out very quickly why. He stayed for 2 days. And then then he said to his disciples, verse 7, let us go back to Judea. His life was in danger if he went back there. They had already tried to stone him. They were not responding as a whole to the teaching of this Son of God. And that's one of the reasons he was able to get away to Bethany, to get away from the crisis, to relax with close friends. But finally he said to his disciples, let's go to Judea. And their quick, normal response, but Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there? As if to suggest, don't you remember what happened before? Don't you know what could happen now? Rabbi, giving him respect, honor. Is that what we're going to do, in essence? Jesus makes a response in verses 9 and 10 that I'm not certain I understand all that he meant. He's speaking from a human point of view, but he's also alluding to spiritual things, I believe. Jesus answered that question, are we going really? Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. Those who know more than I will ever know in seeking to understand all that it's saying is simply saying, first of all, that this is something that needs to be done now from a human point of view. And it's acknowledging the reality that sometimes at the close of a day, when we've had a busy day, we make the comment, wow, that was such a busy day. I'm so thankful that nighttime has finally come. And we've felt that, haven't we? We've said that sometimes in the midst of a busy, busy day. But it's also pulling back a little bit, I think, and speaking of the sovereign nature of God and the timetable that Jesus knew he was under. It wasn't yet time for him to be crucified. That's why he was quick to get away and come to Bethany. But there would be a time when he would not get away. And the reality of the spiritual application seems to be pointed to here as well. There's a human perspective of there's things we need to do and we have a day to do it. And from a spiritual perspective, there's also things that fit in a timetable as well. And darkness could relate to the concept of Satan causing others to put Christ on the cross. But there's a timetable here. And he answers them with an answer. I'm not sure they would have fully understand it. But after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. The reason I don't want to rush into the full story is because we need to understand what we just heard. We celebrated the passing in the last 2.5 weeks of 4 brothers and sisters at 2 different congregations where we have served. And being faithful until death, it's sad and there's an emptiness, but there's a celebration. Connie and others know exactly what that means. When you have someone who looks at death as a passing over into a spiritual presence with God for eternity. And it's important for us to begin to hear what Jesus said to them, so it will be true in our understanding and dealing with life's difficulties. Jesus looked at his death as having fallen asleep. And he looked at that resurrection as not the great miracle that it was, and it was, but a great miracle, but simply from a general perspective, waking him up from a sleep. And it's a way for us to begin, if we haven't thought about it lately, of what death is from God's point of view, and to be prepared for it, and to have a greater understanding so that our response can be a good response. His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." They heard the words and associated with a common understanding. Jesus, John tells us, Jesus had been speaking of his death. I think Lazarus, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. And so John, looking back when he's guided by the Spirit of God to write his gospel, tells us in the order that he wanted to write it, but he gives us the understanding that came later. And if we had been sitting there with Jesus on that occasion, we would have thought the exact same thing. We like to think that we would have had a greater spiritual understanding. Probably not. But there's no excuse now, looking back there, then, now, that we don't have a good understanding of what Jesus is trying to teach us. Death is not the end of it. It's a passing over. It's a twinkling of an eye. It's leaving one area guided by time into a place where time and space have no place. And when we come to realize that, our response to events like this, for ourselves, hopefully as faithful Christians, for others, hopefully as faithful Christians, is all the difference in the world. And we'll deal with some of those elements next week as we look more closely at the scenes given to us. So then he told them, as they were confused, John says, so he told them plainly, verse 14, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. How is God going to be glorified? We just got an idea. How is the Son of God going to be glorified? We just got an idea. Jesus just told us, why would you put your best friends, Mary and Martha, through the turmoil of watching a brother die? The pain of it. The discomfort. Why would you let that happen? And John, as has been his custom, he takes us to a situation and then he pulls back, if you will, metaphorically, and we get to watch what they do in the midst of that situation. And so he's just telling us why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now we come to realize that later he's going to be told, as if he didn't know it, that he's been in the grave for 4 days. And his body's going to have an odor attached to it. The physical circumstances of what Lazarus and his family were going through. Buried with what little they do to prepare a body for burial, and it's going to smell by the time Jesus gets there. But John tells us here, we're going, he's died, but I'm doing it this way for your sake. And I'm glad I wasn't there, because for your sake I'm going to do something so that you may believe. I don't know about you, if I were to choose the miracle that I would want to see in person, this might be it. John's statement seems to suggest that that Jesus believed this might be it. This might be the big miracle that now they will see it and they will believe the way they should believe. And certainly it would have had an effect. Now read ahead. It's all right. You know the story. We'll come back to it for the sermon next week. I don't want to rush it. It's too important a message. But listen to the statement of Thomas. Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we might die with him. You're going back to Judea? You know that they hate you? You know that difficulties will arise out of that? We're going to Judea? Well, we'll go with you, and we're prepared to die with you. I love what I call the pessimistic courage of Thomas. R.H. Strachan says there was not expectant faith, but loyal despair. I like both of those ideas. I'm a Thomas apologist. You've heard me say that before. Thomas did not see the resurrected Lord. He was not there when Christ rose and appeared to the other disciples. And he said, I need to touch and see Jesus. I wasn't there. I need to see it. And the fact that Jesus appeared to many, including 500 at one time, that was needed on the part of God's plan as well. Thomas had not participated yet in God's plan to see a resurrected Savior. And so when he had doubt, we tend to tag him with doubting Thomas until eternity ends, which means never will we forget it. Thomas had not seen the resurrected Lord, and when he did, he thought he needed to see and touch. He did not, and when he saw, he declared, my Lord and Master. And it's Thomas who speaks up here, we're going to let us also go that we may die with him. I like his pessimistic courage, if you will. He was willing. And he went. And he did die for the cause of Christ. Allow me to stop here and look at many other things, Lord willing, next Sunday morning. And it will be my Thanksgiving sermon for this reason. I don't know who I heard it from, but I have used it for many years in studying John 11, maybe 4 or 5 times. And every time I've said what I'm about to say, I see several people grab a pen, grab a pencil, find a piece of paper, and write it down. You'll hear it next week if you don't have a pen and pencil, but you need to write it down. If Jesus can do nothing about death, then whatever else he can do amounts to nothing. That's the story of Lazarus. And that's the story of resurrection from the dead. And it's the story that's personified in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 19. If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most miserable. That's probably where the statement came from. Our hope is not just in this life, it's in eternity. But if Jesus can do nothing about death, then whatever else he can do amounts to nothing. Because he did raise from the dead. He would still be in the tomb. This morning, let's learn the lessons that we can as Jesus is seeking to glorify God and bring glory to himself. Let's see him as the disciples saw him, and let's hear his words, and let's receive them so that we may believe more firmly in the things being taught in the story of Lazarus. Mary and Martha have a story to tell too, and Lord willing, we'll see that next week. We always stand to sing a song of encouragement. We want to encourage you to deal with life matters in whatever way is appropriate. And if you haven't died to sin and raised to walk in newness of life, in that act of being buried in water, baptism, to have sins forgiven, it's offered. We can help to study with you or to actually baptize you. But we're not pressing it. We want you to make that choice. But we'll be glad to help you in following through with that choice while we stand and sing a song of encouragement.
Have your heart that's weary, tending our Lord our care. soul has seen rest from the burden you bear. Do you know, my Jesus? Do you know, my friend? Have you heard He loves you, and that He will abide till the end? Where is your heart, O pilgrim? What does your life reveal? Who is your call for comfort when not but sorrow you feel? Do you know, my Jesus? Do you know, my friend? Have you heard He loves you, and that He will abide till the end? Who knows your tears are holiness? Who is each time you cry? Who understands your heartaches? Who dries the tears from your eyes? Do you know, my Jesus? Do you know, my friend? Have you heard He loves you, and that He will abide till the end? Thank you. Be seated, please. Yeah, that was some great song leading and preaching. I don't know which was better, but we appreciate both. Thank you so much. The prayer that was said this morning was wonderful. My brother Justin, the prayers during the offering was, and the Lord's Supper was certainly touching, and we're just thankful for everybody who served. We're just thankful for everybody who was here, because you're serving the Lord by being here. We're glad that you're here with us, especially visitors. We'd love for you to come back and be with us anytime. We begin on Sunday morning at 9:45 with our Bible study. 10:45 with our worship, again at 6 p.m. And on Wednesday at 6:30 we have our study. So we'd like you to come back and be with us if you can. We have birthdays. Today is Troy Reislinger's birthday. Thursday is Brian Tucker's birthday. Friday, David Williams and Nicole Futch Murphy have birthdays. So we wish all of you happy birthday. We don't have any anniversaries this week. The Parenthood Children's Home is in need of house games this year rather than individual gifts. If you're interested in donating towards the purchasing of games, please give your money to Pat Albritton, Eddie Joe Albritton, or Roseanne Hoodabook by December 4th. The December Ladies Brunch Devo will be Thursday, December 5th at 9:30 a.m. at the home of Pat Albritton. We'll be studying, discussing lesson 3. Please bring a breakfast food. We would like to offer prayers for the comfort for Connie and Mike Kerrigan and their family, and also my brother Bill's widow Penny and his stepchildren.